Okay, perfect. So I'm just gonna do like a little introduction and then we can start. All right.
Okay.
So hi everyone, welcome to a portrait podcast. This is where I interview veterans and their family members, try to learn more about their stories and their experiences growing up as Asian Americans. Usually I interview World War II veterans or their family members, but today I have someone very special. He actually presented many World War II veterans with the Congressional Gold Medal, and he is a veteran himself. So, General Wong, if you don't mind, could you give us a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure thing, Melody, and thanks again for this opportunity. You're doing some great work, and keep it up. Uh, I was born and raised in Southern California. My father and mother both immigrated from mainland China after World War II in the early 50s. My grandfather was actually a three-star general in the Chinese Nationalist Army, and that was on my dad's side. And then on my mother's side, my grandfather was a railroad executive for the government. So their history kind of played a part in my upbringing. Now, during my relatively normal childhood, and I don't think it was anything special compared to everybody else's. But I do remember my father always talking about his father's service to the nation as a military officer, and then about the need to be resilient and adaptable in the face of life's uncertainty, because my dad had a lot of challenges growing up. He moved around a lot because of the war, and then because of the circumstances after the communists took governance of China, which made him come to the U.S. But he always advised that as a Chinese American, we needed to kind of work harder than our peers, because he felt we always start out with a little bit of a disadvantage based on race, and that no matter what we did, we needed to set a good example, because we do represent other Chinese Americans. So we don't want to do anything to disparage our image.
Yeah, yeah, I
And,
love that you
and yeah,
have like
go ahead.
like a yeah, I love you have like a history with the military. I think that's really cool.
Right. I think it influenced my dad for sure, and then he sort of passed that on to us. He always, like I said, he wanted us to be the best, no matter what we did. Just try as hard as you can to be the best. You don't have to be the best, but he always emphasized effort in what we did. I did okay. I did well in school, I guess I have to admit that. I did various sports. I participated in Boy Scouts. I got the Eagle Scout Award, as did my other two brothers. And then was fortunate to rise to general officer rank in the Army. Now, I wasn't the first Chinese American. There's several people who were general officers or flag officers before me as Chinese Americans, but I can say I was the first dental corps officer in any of the services to be promoted to general officer. My mom contributed to my upbringing. She was the more compassionate one, like most moms. Dad was the disciplinarian and provided that guidance in terms of business, professional direction. But my mom always said, be considerate of others and take into account the human nature side of things.
Yeah.
Been married for 37 years, have 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. Only one went into the military as an engineer officer, one of my sons. Nobody went in to be a dentist or a doctor. One's a medical researcher, and my daughter's looking to be a lawyer. So
Cool.
that's kind of my life in a nutshell.
That's really cool. So I know you were also handed the role in presenting the Congressional Gold Medal to veterans. So I was just wondering, like, how did that come about? Could you just tell us, like why you were handed that opportunity?
Yeah, in my career, I was able to connect with a couple of retired Chinese American general officers, Generals Chen and General Lee, and they both were involved with the Congressional Gold Medal Act or the initiative to get the Congressional Gold Medals awarded to Chinese American World War II veterans. It was actually initiated by a gentleman named Ed Gore, who's based out of Houston, by the way.
Oh,
And through his connection with the Chinese American Citizens Alliance organization, they're the ones that got this passed by Congress. But once it was passed, it was decided that Chinese American senior military officers would be the ones that would actually hand them out to veterans or their family members. So through that connection, they invited me to participate in that part of it, and that's handing out the replica gold medals.
oh yeah, that's cool. So why do you think like the award itself is, I guess, really important? Because I actually contacted uh, Miss LCC2 and her
Mm-hmm.
daughter and interviewed her. And I know like it means like a lot to these families. So like why did you think that it's like really worthy thing to do?
This generation, I mean, the Chinese American World War II veterans, I think, reflect the veterans, World War II veterans in general, in that, they felt it was their duty, their call to duty to serve the nation and protect it and protect democracy across the world. But once that was done, then it was just get back to business and live your life. So I think it was typical of Chinese American World War II veterans to really make a big deal of their service. So I think this recognition, long overdue, highlights the contributions of this group of U.S. And I say citizens, but I say that loosely, and I'll mention it why, or I'll explain why later. But this group did volunteer to a certain extent to serve their nation, or the nation, in spite of the prejudices of discriminatory laws and behavior during that time. For me, it was just really personally rewarding to recognize a group of people who need that recognition. And then it was a way to give back, because through their dedicated services and sacrifices, it paved the way for Chinese Americans like myself to then be successful in the military. Over 20,000 Chinese Americans served, it's estimated, served during World War II. It included males and females. And they served in all branches of the services. So Army, Navy, Merchant Marines, Coast Guard, Marines, etc. They served in all theaters of war and in all types of units. And that's something unique to the Chinese American World War II veterans. None of the other ones can make that kind of a claim. And they can claim at least one Medal of Honor winner, multiple Silver Stars, and other awards for valor. So they prove what Chinese Americans are capable of doing, and just demonstrated that as a group of Americans, we'll stand up and do our part.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, your background's really cool.
It was just to me it helps kind of maybe generate discussion, but it just shows what has shaped me as a Chinese American citizen, Chinese American veteran.
Yeah, cool. And then I would like to ask you, like in your experience, have you ever come across any like veterans or family members that you maybe like started talking to? Do you like personally know any of them, or are there like any stories that are very memorable to you?
So from my personal life, I mean, my uncle I knew served as a Navy executive chef. He actually was the personal chef for an admiral in the Navy. He did not see any combat, but he talked about life on aircraft carrier. So that was kind of interesting. And then I met a friend of his who was a Army soldier or sergeant, but he didn't really talk much about his service. The two people that I probably know more about, but they weren't really working for military, the U.S. military, was my grandfather, who was the 3-star in the Chinese Nationalist Army. But my dad would talk about the different campaigns and battles that he was associated with during the fight against the Japanese. And then on my mom's side, my grandfather was a railroad executive, and he helped the Allies through rail support and assistance, probably moving soldiers, personnel, as well as supplies. And he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his contributions. So from that standpoint, those are folks that I personally was connected to. But then I met two interesting either individuals, or one individual and then the family of another. And it's because they're dentists that I really remember their stories. But one individual, Dr. Herbert Yee out of Sacramento, he served towards the end of the World War II, but then became a dentist, and then rose to prominence as a dental professional and a leader within his community and within several professional dental organizations. And then another gentleman, Dr. George Poi, he was a navigator for a B-24 bomber, flew 27 missions in the Pacific before and then the war ended. But he went on to be a chemical engineer, very successful. And his son is a dentist in Michigan. So that's kind of how I kind of remember them. But the thing that really resonates with me is they demonstrated, that the honor and dedication to serve their country during World War II, but it didn't stop there. They then transitioned back into the civilian sector, became successful and contributing citizens to this great nation. So it's just a life, an entire life of helping others that sort of is like a key factor that I kind of just heard repeatedly with all the different veterans or their families as they told stories of what the parent did and what they did after they got out.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I had no idea that your whole family was so involved with the military, but that is also really cool. And then now I would like to shift gears a little bit. I would like to talk about more of your experience, I guess. So growing up, do you remember any major events that happened that maybe affected the relationship between China and America?
Well, growing up, my dad would always comment about how the Chinese government, the communist government, sort of, in his mind, was not a good thing for the country or for the Chinese people. So he was always very critical, based on their background and the fact that he had uprooted. I could understand that. And then you hear about the establishment of diplomatic relationships with China in the 70s, and then a lot of trade and exchange. So that initially, I think the communist China thing probably hurt the image of Chinese to a certain extent, but I think people recognize that there was a difference between the Chinese Americans in the country and the communist Chinese in China. And then as relationships between the countries improved, you get a sense that people got a better understanding of Chinese and the culture and the history. And I think relationships improved from that standpoint. But then being in the military, we look at how we're trying to defend our nation, and then the growth of China, their economy, their military strength, create concern that will they become too strong and become a threat or peer competitor. So I think that kind of affects the perceptions of Chinese Americans here in the U.S. because when you look at what happened during the pandemic, when people are thinking there was some Chinese responsibility to the pandemic, which I still don't know what the real answer is. And then the tensions being created in the South China Sea and with Taiwan. I think it just gives ammo to people who want to demonize Chinese Americans or Asians in general. It just gives them opportunities to do that.
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I definitely haven't experienced a whole lot in my lifetime, but I know like from my personal standpoint about like how the pandemic kind of affected the way like Asian Americans were perceived. And like you definitely hear those stories about like hate crimes and things committed against us. So have you or like anyone you know been discriminated against because you were like Chinese American, either like in the military or like outside?
So personally, the only memories of sort of being discriminated against was probably in junior high, high school, during the Vietnam War, people who were, I would just say they're uneducated in that sense of culture would call me a gook or a chink. It's just the typical, schoolyard type abuse kind of a thing or name calling. But, in school or in the dental profession or within the Army, I really didn't experience what I would consider overt prejudice or discrimination because, those professions, the Army organizations, military in general, you're judged on who you are, your character, and by your actions and performance, not by how you look. Yeah, there'll still be pockets and incidences of discriminatory activity, but it's really the exception and not the rule, because especially in the military, you have to trust your, we call them battle buddies, the people on your left and your right, whether you're training for deployments or in actual deployments. So it doesn't matter the color of the skin, the religion, or those factors. It's based on, can you trust them to do their job? So for me, not an issue. Now I grew up with stories of from my dad. He experienced prejudice in college. He went to a school in Idaho, and think he was told like he couldn't date the local white female students because the families didn't want a Chinese person dating them. So, and trying to get ahead in the research profession. After he got out of school, he found it was difficult as a Chinese. There was discrimination there. And trying to get housing at the time, renting apartments or buying a house, a lot of resistance there. So, he felt it more directly. And I think that shaped his viewpoints on discrimination and how, as Chinese Americans, we had to work harder to overcome that and just be able to through our actions, show that we're as good as anybody else. And they had a friend, actually a fairly well-known individual named Dr. Sammy Lee. He was a physician in the Southern California area, but he was also an Olympic gold medalist. And, he heard stories of him, he couldn't go to he couldn't use the community swimming pool except one day a week. And that's when all the minorities could use the pool, but you couldn't get into the pool with other white patrons, so to speak. and it's the day that they would then drain the pool and clean it. So in order to practice to be a diver, they built like a pit and filled it with sand, and they would learn to dive and then land into a sand pit, because that was the only thing available to them. So just hearing those kinds of stories really made me think that I was lucky not to have to endure those kinds of prejudices.
Yeah. Um, that, yeah, that definitely sounds horrible having to dive into sand. Um, and I also feel like it's very interesting because I feel like in some ways, like Asian Americans were like looked down upon. And then like also in some other ways, or like I guess more recently, there has been like the model minority myth, where like I guess we're looked upon as being like the best in like grades, school, and things like that. So I feel like there has been like a divide in what people think about it because some think like, oh, I guess it's praising us because it's saying like our hard work paid off. But then some other people also see it as they're like categorizing all Asian Americans into this tiny box when like not, I guess people are different and not like everyone should be categorized into something. So do you have like any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's human nature that people want to categorize people. It gives them a sense of order. So yeah, when it comes to the Chinese Americans, Asians in general, yeah, the perception that we study hard, we work hard, we don't make trouble. I think there's validity to it. I mean, culturally, those are characteristics that when you look into the history of Chinese history, not only in the U.S. but in back in back in China, those were things that people had to do or tried to do to get ahead. Um, and then the filial kind of obedience, respecting authority, whether it's the family or the community or the government. I mean, those are kind of inculcated within our culture, and that's a good thing in certain respects, because people would say, oh yeah, this Chinese American is going to work hard, and they'll be loyal, and they'll listen well. But then there's negative perceptions too. It's like, we're too timid, we won't take initiative, we're too passive in a sense, which to me, it, not in those, I don't think we're that way in the negative sense. I think it aligns with, we tend to follow authority, but I think we have to learn to challenge it when we need to and stand up for ourselves. So, and then when we do that, then all of a sudden it becomes an issue. Why are the Chinese, getting, rebellious, so to speak? So, yeah, I think through continued education and getting to know people, I think these stereotypes will eventually break down and go away.
Yeah. And then so like what do you think, I guess, the general American public can do in regard to maybe these stereotypes in order to ensure better equality for like Chinese or Asian Americans?
I think it's just this continuous effort to educate people, because to me, a lot of prejudice just stems from ignorance. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, people that are prejudiced against Chinese probably never even met one, you know, until
Yeah.
they maybe did something against one. But you know, I think just efforts that you're doing to um, increase awareness of who the Chinese Americans are, where they, what their history back in China are, their cultures, their customs, and how that affects the current day Chinese Americans, is probably to me the best way of doing it. and then highlight, like you're doing, the contributions of Chinese Americans, whether they're prominent ones. You look in government, there's a lot more Chinese Americans in the U.S. government or in the military, but just everyday citizens who are, through their own um, way, contributing to the image, a positive image of Chinese Americans in business, in healthcare, community service.
Yeah, that is definitely like my goal, I guess, for this project that I'm doing. I'm really just hoping to like highlight the contributions of Chinese Americans and just spread awareness. So on that note, how do you think I could like better achieve my goal of cementing the place of Asian Americans in American society? So like right now, I'm trying to like paint portraits of World War II veterans. Um, and then I'm also trying to like donate them to their hometown, like maybe like their libraries or their schools. And obviously like doing these interviews and also making like a website with all that information. So if you have any suggestions, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I really like your angle of including sort of an art perspective to this initiative. So you're going beyond just telling a story and doing these interviews. You're adding the artwork piece. So just keep that up. You know, include your art through whether it's sculpture, paint, drawings, whatever, or music. Maybe expand that piece to get more interest in your efforts. And as you expand your interview base, or number of interviews that you're doing of people, maybe get out and try and record some of those activities that you're doing, uh, so that people can see what you're doing with other Chinese American citizens, and then connect it to larger social media platforms. I don't know if you're doing Instagram, or I'm not a social media person by any means. I leverage the knowledge and skill sets of my daughter, but Instagram or um, I guess Twitter or Facebook, and then LinkedIn too, because that way you can connect to Chinese Americans who are in that business sectors, whether it's just about any and all business sectors. That will expand your pool of potential people you could interview.
Yeah, yeah, I love those suggestions. Definitely like I would love to expand like the social media aspect. I'm currently like trying to build an Instagram account. I just haven't had really a lot of time to do it, but yeah, those are definitely some things that I would have in my mind. And then finally, do you have any things you would like to say to like younger generations of like Asian Americans like myself?
Yeah, I mean, sort of like what my dad told me, and that is, um, don't don't forget the roots that you came from, because you know your history, your family connections, they in part define who you are or who we are. So you don't have to adhere to everything the past has, but learn about the past, learn about your relatives, the journey that the relatives took to get here, and you'll appreciate. I think it helps you appreciate the struggles that folks before us had to go through and how it made it better, in a way, for all of us. Um, and then, work hard, stand up for yourself when needed. Always maintain your character, your integrity, And no matter what you decide to do in life, give back to society, because we're not just islands of individuals. We belong to a community, and we're all going to benefit in some sense from other people's work. So we need to give back to help those who follow us to have a better life or a better experience as well. And then just enjoy. It's not all work. You have to balance it with some fun things too.
Yeah, I really love that. And then just before you go, are there like any other veterans that I might be able to interview or do drawings on, if you know any?
Yeah, I would definitely put you in contact with the individuals that kicked off this Chinese American World War II veteran recognition project. Ed Gore, he's I think he was an engineer in his professional life, but really took this as a personal journey, mission to get this Congressional Gold Medal passed. And then Generals Chen and Lee, they both have really interesting backgrounds, and they'd be great people to interview and tell you even more stories of all the veterans they actually were meeting and working with.
Yes. Sorry, it was lagging a
No
little,
worries.
but
Yeah, just a little bit. No problem.
yeah. That sounds great. If we could like stay in contact with email, that would be great. So I can like,
Sure.
I guess, have this train of people going. Um, and other than that, I don't really have anything else. So thank you again for doing this interview with me. And yeah, have a great day.
You too. Thanks for the opportunity, and good luck to you, and best wishes for continued success.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.